Thank you. Thank you, Simon, for the very warm introduction. Once again, my name is Jazzy Collins. I am the CEO of Force Perspective. And a little bit about Force Perspective. We specifically champion underrepresented groups through storytelling. Everything that we've ever worked on has made sure that we either we have writers, we have directors that are all people of color from different LGBTQ groups, everything. Something about my experience while working in this industry, I struggled. I had every single door close in my face. I've had, racism. I've dealt with microaggressions, and every card was already stacked against me, being a woman and also being Black. So I want to make sure that I continue to hold space for those people that might not have access to that. And when I got to speak publicly in 2020 regarding the atrocities that were happening behind the scenes, I realized something that I thought was the biggest challenge was actually my asset. So I continue to this day with Force Perspective, bringing people into the door, having stories being told, and that's what we're here to talk about today. We're going to try to obviously bring in, learn a little bit more about film investing, but we also want to learn a little bit more about storytelling and how important it is to continue to support the arts. So many of you are probably here today because you've never financed a film, but you've also been interested in it. So today is your time to get that exposure to outstanding projects into the space. I'm thrilled to be joined by a fantastic group of expert panelists who will be discussing the ins and outs of films from conception all the way through completion, and how to maximize your returns in the process. All right, so let's invite our amazing panelists to the stage. We're going to start with Deidre Owens. Deidre Owens is Vice President of Finance at Revolution Entertainment Services, where she oversees finance activities for the growing entertainment payroll company. She came to Revolution after 11 years at Cast & Crew, where she launched Cast & Crew Financial Services. Prior to joining Cast & Crew, Ms. Owens held the post of Senior Vice President of Finance at Grosvenor Park Media, where she specialized in structuring and negotiating film and entertainment investments, including single and multi-project debt and debt equity facilities. All right. And then we have David Lee, the co-founder of Sovereign Ventures. David studied finance and accounting at USC before embarking on a career with Warner and HBO, where he worked on shows including Silicon Valley and Game of Thrones in the content strategy and planning department. He left his corporate career behind to co-found Sovereign Ventures, partnering with funds and syndicates to form the community layer for the venture ecosystem. So let's give it up for David. And last but not least, we have Shane Collins, the head of production at Force Perspective. Shane is a veteran physical production producer and member of Producers Guild of America. He is responsible for thousands of hours of TV and feature programming, including the most recent season of Percy Jackson and the Olympians on Disney+. His work has won accolades at Sundance Film Festival and Cannes Lions. So thank you all for joining.
Hello.
All right, so let's start with the big overall question. Why invest in film? Shane, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, we invest in film because it's great. As entertainers, entertainment is something that we all like and we go and watch every day, right? So as an industry, we are going through a bit of a turbulent time. However, there is still a market because people are always going to watch. It's just changed a little bit, where not only are blockbusters not really doing that well, so there is a market for the indie film space.
Absolutely. And David, what do you think?
Okay, this works. I think film is great, right? Because it's narrative. And in this world, the only thing that connects people deeply, soulfully across all borders and culture is going to be storytelling. So no matter how the distribution model works in the future, entertainment, especially when it comes to storytelling, is always going to be staying. The staying power is permanent. So as an asset class here, I know a lot of people don't have the sort of film background. The asset classes here is also very interesting. What I normally tell people that film is the ultimate version of venture, and then just also with a lot of glitz and glamour as well.
And Deidre, what do you think?
Well, in addition to the creative aspects, which I'm probably not the person to opine on, But, from my perspective on the finance side, I'd say it's also sort of recession proof. I mean, I think we saw that in the pandemic, right? Like when people stay home, they watch movies. When the economy is good, they go out and watch movies. What may change is exactly how they're consuming film and television, but they're always doing it. So I think it's one important thing. I think there's also, as we'll talk about over the course of this hour, there are sort of, there are smart ways to invest in films. There are structures that, make sense that you'll see in other industries in terms of financing. So I think, it sort of melds. There's like creative, personal reasons to want to invest in film, but there's also business reasons, I'd say.
Absolutely. I love that. So we're going to throw it back to Shane. How do you originate projects and figure out what you want to bring to market for financing?
Yeah, so first, when we are going to originate a project at Force Perspective, we are taking a look at, are we going with originals or IP? So we're either licensing IP, we're taking a novel that's doing really well, or we are going ahead and we're getting scripts from a bunch of independent writers and saying, hey, is this something that we think has a product market fit? One of the ways we do that is we're using AI tools like Greenlight, which is an AI tool that we can take and submit scripts into. It gives us back basically a script reader score. Anything with a 7, 8, or 9, we then read and vet and see if it makes sense with our company ethos. And then we go ahead and we go, okay, does it have a market? Right? Because you can have the best film in the world, and if it doesn't have a market, if we don't think it's going to make a return, it doesn't make sense to make. So we'll run comps. We'll basically look at, if we're, say, taking a horror comedy, we're saying, okay, how have our horror comedies done in the last 3-4 years? We'll run the numbers, see, okay, is this hitting a return profile that we need, that this becomes something that we think is a good investment? Going ahead, and if it is, we're taking it to packaging.
Got it. Love it. So once a story is in place, David, can you talk about packaging and what that means?
Sure. Packaging, I think in a way, it's a very producerial role, and in the venture ecosystem is the founder role, right? And the packaging itself, before I go into the details, really become the clearinghouse of everything that matters. So that means first you have to clear the IP, right? You have to have a relationship with the casting directors. You have to also know the below the line, which is production people, and you should have also a relationship with the studios. So it's a really difficult job to do. So it takes certain kind of skill sets to put it all together. And in terms of casting, in the very first step, even though films, you can see it seems to be very organized, but really it's first you have to coordinate the timing, because all the actors, they have their own lives, they have their own agent, they have their own gods to answer to. So they're very busy. So in order for you to do a film, you have to know what type of talent you want to be in, first of all, right? And then you have to work with their schedule. So you can imagine sometimes, as you know, getting a meeting together among 5 people is almost impossible. Now thinking about getting 200 people all agree on the timeline, you have to do that. So in order to start out engine a film, you first really have to make sure that the cast are available, right? You work with the casting directors, understanding who can do this film, and then from there, you're backtracking all the timeline. So the first, you have to get an agreement with the cast to say, I'm willing to be on this. Using that as a lead-in, so you can actually talk to other people, such as directors, other production companies, to say, does this timeline work? So you get a line of intent, or sometimes just actually pay a fee, right? Pay or play to get a cast to say, no matter what happens, you're going to be in the first position to be available for my film. If you're not, then everything falls apart. So I think that's the first step.
Absolutely. And then, you can get an LOI from a star, and then you could also, use that to raise financing as well.
Exactly. So with the financing, the people who are funding this, they really care about, do you have everything, what it takes to put my money in here? So you have to have the cast, director, everything in line.
Yeah, absolutely. So traditionally, that's how packaging has been, but with talent attachments now starting to get a little bit tougher. Shane, can you talk about the new methods that you're working on with attachments?
Yeah, I mean, that's really been the biggest thing in indie film recently, is especially after the SAG-AFTRA strikes that kind of shut down the industry. We are seeing at the packaging stage a lot of talent is not going to attach themselves to an indie film until there's financing in place. So it kind of creates a chicken and the egg problem, right? You go, okay, well, if we're trying to raise independent financing, we need a star. And the star goes, we can't be in the film unless there's independent financing. So how do you get past that? So basically what we've started doing is what we're calling talent contingent financing. And it doesn't sound like anything really that different, but in our industry, which has a lot of, entrenched norms, it kind of is. So what we've been doing is basically we'll put together 12 cast on a list. We'll pre-do the financials for, okay, these 12 stars are about the same bucket level of star and returns, and we'll do the financials based on that, take it to package that as a financing package, take it to an investor group and say, would you guys finance this based on one of these 12 people being attached? Sign the financing agreement, then money goes into escrow, and then we go ahead and we can make direct offers to these stars. So rather than LOIs, where in the traditional model you get an LOI, you go to a financier, you get the budget for the film, then you go back to the star. At that point, you've got, okay, well, it's just an LOI, so now you have to negotiate with the star. You're over a barrel, can you make it close? If you can't close it, then you've got your investor's money, and that becomes a fight because ideally you want to keep it to make the film, but obviously your investor doesn't want to. With cast contingent financing, that money only gets released once that star signs. But because that money is already there in escrow, we can make direct offers rather than just LOIs.
Awesome. So now that we have a package, let's talk about figuring out where we're going to shoot this. So Deidre, can you talk to us about location-based incentives?
Sure. I mean, I think how this has evolved significantly over the last 20 years. I think Canada was probably the first region to really understand the power of the production industry and what kind of economic activity that can bring to a place. So Canada started in the 90s, actually providing not what we think of today, tax credits, but other incentives for investors to invest in the film and television industry. So in the 80s, you saw a ton of shows going up to shoot in Canada. That was sort of the first round of runaway production. Since then, I think the next major shift started after Katrina. Louisiana, a few different states had tax credit programs. Louisiana really bumped their program up, and they were the first state, I'd say, to really create an industry, like a real significant industry outside of New York and California. And since then, it's really taken off across the country. I think between 35 or 40 states have tax credit programs where they basically incentivize film and television productions to come to the state. And that's in the form of money, really, like whether there's a few different, it's tax credits or rebates that once you film in the area, at the end you sort of prove out how much you spent, and then they usually write a check. So this is really changed the industry entirely. I think you've probably heard people talk about how all the industry has left California, and there's still a fair amount here, but Georgia is now a huge place. Massachusetts, I think you may have noticed that there was a spate of gangster movies set in the Boston area, over the last 10 years, and that's largely because of the tax credits. It really has shifted how filmmakers think about where they're going to shoot. It's, creatively, you have to think about location, but then you also think creatively about how you can make one place look like another. We're also seeing a lot of the same thing happening internationally. Malta's been a big place over the last couple years. UK has always had a strong tax program. Australia, New Zealand are just to name a few. But it really, it's very rare that in the independent or studio space that you choose to shoot somewhere without first thinking about the incentives you're going to get there. It's really changed the industry.
And it can be very significant, right? Can you talk about percentages?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Malta, I've done a couple shows there recently, 40% of the budget. Now, you have to remember when you say it's not every single dollar you spend that you get an incentive on, but a lot of these programs are very generous. In the case of Malta, as long as you run it through the Malta company, your payments to actors, U.S. actors, European actors outside of Malta, as long as you pay them through the local company, that can qualify. So, we're talking pretty big numbers.
Yeah, I mean we've got some packages in New York right now that upstate New York has a
Upstate, yeah.
40% incentive. Like Deidre was saying, it's not top line, but it's about 33% is what it averages out to. So you get a 33%, a third of your budget back from the government of New York,
Right.
and obviously there's international incentives and there's reasons to do that. But, if you want to stay in the US, I think that's probably the best right now. New Jersey's near it.
Yep.
But yeah.
Yeah, no, it's once New York changed their program recently where they allowed sort of above the line, meaning like producers, actors, it allowed incentives on that spend as well. And that really sort of made it very competitive.
And it's amazing what some set designers can do because they make New York look like anywhere, or they could make London look like New York, Malta look like LA. Like, it's incredible what people have been doing. So now that we have a location locked and we have some great incentives, David, can you talk about closing, financing, and moving into production?
Yeah, so the closing financing is the tough part. So as you Deirdre just said, that the incentive will play a big piece in that, right? So for the financier here, you can also probably immediately think that if you have a rebate, you probably can finance that too. So as a producer, what you want to do is making sure once you have the cast, you get the initial money in to fund the initial production, but the rest of it come from talking to sales agents. If you're independent, right? You want to get the sales estimate, and then with that estimate, you can finance further on top of that. So this is how you get all the money in. With the studio system, if you, let's say you've got IP, you want to directly sell to them. So once you package it, the studio themselves internally have a scorecard. So any stars you can imagine under the sky, they know exactly how much they can generate on each territory. So they're going to aggregate all that information to say, well, this movie or this show, I'm going to pay X amount of money for as a minimum guarantee. In this case, the minimum guarantee is not the sales one. It's the one that will say, okay, we'll pay this amount to buy your rights out for either US or international rights altogether. With that money coming in, this is how you can complete the entire financing package. And then some of the other financing nuances we probably don't cover here because it's very tedious. There's different ways you can do. Also, no one really does anymore. But if you're a really big deal, you can still get a negative pickup, meaning the studio actually fund everything from the very beginning, contingent upon that the IP is clear, and then you can deliver. So so it depends on the playbook here. You can have multiple different ways to do the financing.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that one of the things that we're doing in the indie space is, we basically give our financiers an option, right? If you say you do a $5 million film, you shoot it in upstate New York, you have that 33% haircut. You can either go, okay, well, with a $5 million investment, basically only 2/3 of your capital is at risk. The rest is, refunded by the state of New York. Or if you have an investor that maybe doesn't want to self-finance that tax credit, you go, okay, well, you get to make a $5 million film for 3.7 basically, and then use a company to finance the tax credit. So that would be something like Revolution would offer that sort of service.
Yeah, absolutely. And can we talk a little bit about timelines here too? So like, what if you don't successfully attach a talent at this point, or, in that specific model that you guys are talking about?
Are we talking about like cast contingent financing?
Yes, cast contingent financing.
Yeah. So in a cast contingent model that we were talking about before, in that model, it's really, say we have a 6-month window from getting the funding commitment to attach talent to release funding. Outside of that, once you go into production, you're probably looking about most movies, you're making 90% of the money that you're ever going to make in about 3 years. So if you are a investor that is used to a lot of tech plays or companies where you're used to really long runways, you're used to your capital getting locked up for 10, 15 years, film financing plays can be a great short-term option.
Yeah, absolutely. Deidre, can you talk a little bit about where Revolution comes in once we move into production?
Right. So the company I work for now, Revolution Entertainment Services, is a payroll company that focuses on the film, television, and commercial production space. So unlike most industries, the payroll companies that focus in the entertainment industry do just that. Like, you couldn't use an ADP to pay production. With all the guilds and unions and the different rules for how someone must be paid and when overtime comes in and all the unions that must be paid different amounts out of the salaries, it really is very specialized. So there's a handful of companies that do that. So Revolution is one of the newer companies that does that. And so every production needs a payroll company to pay all their talent. The payroll companies also provide the production accounting software. So this is really, the production accounting software is really how you track how the money's being spent. This is important for the tax credits, as well as just monitoring how the production is going. So again, similar to how you can't really use an ADP to pay people, you really can't use QuickBooks or anything. People do it. I don't recommend it. You really should be using production accounting software when you have a production. It's the standard. So that's what the company I work for. That's their main focus: payroll and production accounting software. And I'm a financier for film and television. I was at Cast and Crew for 11 years. I launched their financing division, and I just recently went over to Revolution to do the same thing.
Just real quick on that is that, you really do need the professionals. At HBO, if you submit your budget that's not in the proper format of software, they immediately just exit. It's like, we can't work with these people. So definitely professionals are needed.
Yeah, it's a bit of a red flag if someone's sending you something through QuickBooks.
Yeah.
So things are getting expensive. Costs are constantly on the rise, especially in production. So how do we make sure that nothing overruns in production? Shane, are we using any new tools to streamline production?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it in our daily lives. Every day, costs go up, right? So we are trying constantly to, how can we bring down costs in production? I'm sure a lot of you have been going to Gen AI panels this week as part of Tech Week. So, I already mentioned Greenlight, which is one of the tools we're using in pre-production. We're using Gen AI in pre-production for kind of rapid storyboarding. So that takes costs down there. And then in post, you've got a lot of AI tools that we're using to just kind of take that down, especially in VFX and editing. You can take down a department that used to be hundreds of people to 30 people, 20 people, maybe even less. So as that grows, we're constantly using new tools for that, and that's able to squeak out 2% here, 4% here, 6% here, ending up adding to, we're able to, compared to other companies, put together budgets that deliver the same for 10 to 15% less spend. And a lot of that is just due to new tools in the space.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also total timeline goes down a little bit too, because you're using this, right?
Oh, definitely. I mean, we're not spending 8-10 months in post. We're spending 4.
Yeah. So now that the film is done, let's talk about getting it to market. So, David, how do you sell a film?
Well, the selling part of it really depends on who you're talking to, right? So with the studio, it's a completely different game. With independent, it's a different game. So for studios, they have their distribution channels already out there. They built that for the past 30, 40 years. So they know exactly what to sell it to. They just have to push it down. That also related to cost overrun, same thing, right? So you have HBO had $5 billion to manage. So if something went over by 100 million, okay, we'll move it around, right? But for independent, it's very important you work with the right people who can actually get that control. So when it comes to sales, independent films, we mentioned that earlier, actually part of the sales already happened before production even commenced because you're using that pre-sale to finance the movie, right? So once the movie goes through production, actually went to market, being purchased, then you're going to materialize or actualize everything else you haven't sold pre-sale wise. Right, those money will come in going through the market. So there's several ways, right? I think a lot of independents still going through the film festival circuit. That's where really the film festivals, even though it's a showcase, but really it's a marketplace. Everybody goes there to try to showcase their things and to see what kind of sales agents around the world or what channel will pick it up. But right now, because the studio is so dominating and also entertainment is going through a lot of changes, so people like Shane and Jazzy who have a really deep connection with the industry is very important because ideally what you want to do is after you finish finish production, you can get a studio distribution because they can pretty much buying out all rights, give the right number. Otherwise, even after you finish the film, which is a lot of independent without a relationship, their suffering is that they still have to reach out worldwide independent distribution channels through sales agents, which is a very kind of a tedious process. But overall, yeah, film market and then sales agents are still the way to go.
I want to expand on that a little with, some of it too just comes down to our investors' risk tolerance, right? And what their incentives are. So, if you have a investor that is a lot more concerned on, hey, we need to make a return fast, right? You're really concerned about IRR. Then you have a scenario where, okay, let's say we have I was using a $5 million film before, $5 million film. We shoot it in New York. We get a 33% of our money comes back to us. So now we're at what, 3.6-ish that is, capital that's at risk. And then we get two great stars. We announce, do our PR campaign, and we're able to pre-sell it before we shoot anything. And a pre-sales company comes to us and says, hey, we're going to give you a minimum guarantee of $5 million. Well, then we would go to our investors and say, okay, what's your risk tolerance? We have this deal on the table where we could basically get this $5 million guarantee that covers your production budget, and then you still have the tax credit that's coming back. So you're going to make 1.67 on top of that, and it's been 3 months, and that's a great IRR. But there's also the option that you take this to market, you take it to Sundance. If it wins Sundance, or it's doing, winning accolades at South by Southwest or Cannes or something, you get into a bidding war. And at that point, maybe you go to and sell it to a studio or a big indie distributor like A24 or Neon, and you have a bidding war, and you can get a $10 million minimum guarantee. So, that really just all depends on your investor's risk tolerance. Do you want to take it to market and try and get even higher returns and guaranteed returns, or do you want that guaranteed return now, fast?
Yeah, just on that real quick, right? So like, for example, Shane mentioned A24, which is a powerhouse in distribution, and then later on they were able to backward work into financing film as well. And the reason they can buy that money is because they have the relationship with studios. So they know the scorecard. They know with this movie, and then they have their own subjective assessment on saying that, okay, with this cast, with this director, we can guarantee a certain amount with our studio partners, but we also think this movie is just freaking amazing. So we can get a lot of upside. That's how they can come up with a number, right? Without that relationship, that's why independent sales agents are not as good as those people.
Yeah. Deidre, do you want to jump in at all? I know they covered a lot of it.
I think the other thing to think about with the distribution deal, it's not just a decision whether or not to enter into a deal. There's also the type of deal, because we've talked about minimum guarantees, and what that means is basically, as we said, it's sort of the right to distribute the project in a specific territory. But essentially, what the distributor is doing, saying, I'm going to guarantee you $5 million in this case. But it is a guaranteed payment against, the profits of the film. So in that kind of deal, the studio will pay the $5 million. When they actually exploit the film, the revenues will come in. They will take a distribution fee off the top. Because they guaranteed you $5 million, it's going to be a higher distribution fee than what they would do if it's a straight distribution deal. The other thing that they could do is say, I'll distribute it for you without guaranteeing you any money. And that is riskier for you as a filmmaker, because you're not guaranteed anything, but they'll charge a lower fee. You don't have to pay back the $5 million plus interest on that. So, it's the structure of the deal that you enter into also, can vary depending on your risk tolerance.
Absolutely. Fantastic segue into what do returns look like? How do investors get their money back? So David, can you talk about that?
Sure. I mean, I always tell people this, like, there's no new story. There's no way to tell it. Similarly, when it comes to film financing, how you generate money and pay back investors in other field exactly applies here, just with some nuance, right? So usually we get the money in from the top. You're going to take up distribution fees. That's the right away. And then you're going to take it off what we normally call like must-have costs, right? So some of the stuff is a residual, which means that the guilds thank God for them, the guilds will have to pay their talent at a minimum guarantee fee based on their guild agreement. So those fees, no matter what happens, have to come out. So you deduct all this unnecessary cost. Then you're going to deduct anything that's like what we call third-party participation, which is usually the main talent, right? The directors, producers, or actors. They will actually take a preferred term. You deduct that. And once you do so, you deduct all the financing costs, everything. It becomes the net profit. If there's anything left, which is difficult, then you're going to share with everybody who else is involved in this. So the waterfall in pretty much every single deal applies here. It's from the top, you get the necessary cost, and your senior debt, junior debt, and eventually it's the remaining people to participate.
I mean, I think we should talk a little bit on like the indie space, what that looks like in terms of how investors, right, make their money back. So a pretty standard term for investors would be you payout schedule is as that film makes money, it's your investor gets first dollar back after, guild residuals, all that. They get first dollar back to make back their budget plus an additional 20% interest. And then after that, it's a 50-50 split between the investor share and what we would call the producer share. And that producer share is going to, that 50% is going to be divided up against basically the rest of the above the line, the people that have a profit share. So your producers, actors, writer, executive producers, that sort of thing.
Deidre, your brain is ticking. Do you something want to jump in?
No, that covers it. I think that's right.
Well, the most valuable thing of all is also being on a red carpet with Scarlett Johansson. So that's also a pretty added bonus too. So that's how you do a film, right? That's it. So for those of you that have any questions or anything, we're not obviously doing a Q&A here, but feel free to pull any of us aside. We're happy to discuss a little bit more or projects that we're working on. You could find me, you could find Shane, you could find Simon, you could find Abby from Queensgate, and we'd love to tell you a little bit more about the slate of films that we're working on. So now it's time for brunch and more mimosas. So thank you all so much for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jazzy.